Dear listeners, welcome to this latest episode of the podcast series, The Way Out is In. I'm Jo Confino, a coach working at the intersection of personal transformation and systems evolution.
And I'm Brother Phap Huu, a Zen Buddhist monk, student of Zen Master TWOII in the Plum Village tradition. And dear friends, before we start our podcast, I would like to share something very special. On September the 12th, Jo and I will both be in London to record a live episode of The Way Out is In. And we'll be joined by author and poet Ocean Vuong, who is a dear friend of mine and also an admirer of our teacher TWOII and the Plum Village tradition. The evening will have a deep reflection and sharing on how we cultivate joy and togetherness in the midst of hardship, something that we all need in today. And you can find details and tickets at plumvillage.uk/podcast. And we truly hope to see you present with us.
And a few days before that, on August the 26th, Brother Phap Huu and I will be releasing our second book, which is called Calm in the Storm, Zen Ways to Cultivate Stability in an Anxious World. It's a companion for these uncertain times, and we're so happy to share our journey into the unknown. You can pre-order it now, and it will also be available at the live event in London. Our first book, being with Busyness, Zen Ways to Transform Overwhelm and Burnout, can also be purchased at your favourite bookstore. We'd love to connect with you in London. And today, brother, we are going to be talking about the art of transmission. And by that, we mean this sort of, not transmission in terms of TV, but in terms of the transmission of wisdom over space and time.
The way out is in.
Hello everyone, I am Jo Confino.
And I'm Brother Phap Huu.
And brother, we are going to talk today about something that's very particular to Buddhism, which is the art of transmission. And I've always been intrigued by this because often when people do a ceremonial acceptance of the 5 mindfulness trainings, that's called a transmission. When Thich Nhat Hanh or one of the other teachers gives Dharma talks, they offer not a teaching, but a transmission of the wisdom. So I've been very intrigued by this, and I've been learning over time what it means. But let's turn to someone who actually already knows what it means and who actually is a transmitter of wisdom. So, Brother Phap Huu, what do we mean by transmission as opposed to, well, teaching?
The insight of transmission, or as we're calling it in this podcast, the art of transmission, we touch something very deep in the teachings of Buddhism, and that is emptiness. Emptiness here doesn't mean we don't exist and nothing is there, but in the insight of emptiness, which is one of the highest insight because that is the pathway to be connected to interconnectedness, or our teacher calls it interbeing. And emptiness here, it speaks about non-self. When we are coming to learn anything, not just Zen, not just religion, even in school or in life, there is something that we have to activate to learn, and that is our not knowing. But we're so well trained in the knowing or the pretending to knowing in order to be seen, to be accepted, to feel we have the right to be in a position. And it speaks about our modern time about identification. And in the light and in the understanding of Zen and Buddhism, when we are coming to learn and to receive, first of all, we have to touch something that is called the beginner's mind. The beginner's mind speaks about the willingness to learn. And in the beginner's mind, we come with a request to be taught, a request to be shown the way. As in Vietnamese and Chinese, spirituality is a lot of the time written as Tao, meaning the path, the way. So when we are at the way, we want to be guided because we don't know. So in the beginner's mind, we also touch something that is we're empty. We're empty of not knowing. And that mind is a very precious mind and one of the highest mind, I would say, in the spirit of learning. Sister Hero speaks about the art of unlearning. And coming to transmission, we are in touch with the unlearning in order to see something new. So there is a gata that we practice in our daily life in transmission. And it goes like this. And our teacher, of course, with a poet's mind and a poet's skill, he retranslated that touches this beautiful insight. And it goes like this. And we always announce this when we offer a prayer to the Buddha or offer a prayer to our ancestors. The one who bows and the one who is bowed to are both by nature of emptiness. Therefore, the communication between them is inexpressively perfect. The one who bows, that is me. So in my greeting of the one who I am seeing in front of me, I am not just a separate self. In me, I already see the teacher in me. I already see you in me. Therefore, the transmission can happen. Your heart is opening up. And the one who is bowed to, the one who is receiving the reverence, receiving the love, receiving the request, for them to transmit, they're also empty of a separate self. Because when they're transmitting wisdom, this wisdom doesn't come from them. This wisdom comes from a stream of ancestors, genetic, spiritual, land. And so therefore, when the transmitter is in that full presence of non-self, emptiness, the transmission is true. There is no pride in it. There's no ego in it. And when we are in that state, that transmission becomes very alive and is a transmission of not just the present moment, but of also the multi-generation of past. And that wisdom, therefore, is a stream of living wisdom because from the past, it comes to the person who is present. And that person will be transmitting insights, but not copying and pasting from what they've learned, but they share it from now their lived experience. They're transmitting it from their direct insight of how they're applying the practice into their daily life. So then this transmission becomes very alive. And therefore, when the transmitter touches that emptiness, the communication is perfect because the communication is present moment based. As we know in the Plum Buddhist tradition, the first Dhamma seal, it is to live happily in the present moment. I have arrived, I am home. So all of our teaching, even though it has a root from the past, but the tree is alive in the here and now. And the leaves and the fruits that is being offered, the refuge that is being offered is today. It is here, it is now. And the fruit has to be alive today for the receiver to eat the fruit. So when we speak on transmission, it speaks on a very deep practice. And it's very difficult to remember this insight because so many times when we are transmitting, we enter into mode of knowledge only. Not saying that knowledge is not important. Knowledge is present, but knowledge becomes alive when we bring our direct experience into it. And transmission, this word here, is not only between teachers and students. It is friendship. There's a lot of transmission. In daily life, in parents, we are in now the second day of our summer opening, and there's so much family that is present. There's a lot of parents, there's a lot of children, and there's a lot of transmission happening right here, right now. It's not through just words. It is through the way we look at each other. It is through how we show up for one another. It is the transmission of energy. And every day we are receiving transmission from the whole cosmos. And there's a lot of types of transmission where, as a practitioner, we also have to develop a kind of awareness to see if we want to receive that transmission also. There's negative transmission, there's positive transmission, and there's universal transmission where we cannot ignore it. And we think that we are protecting ourselves from it, but it is seeping in. Sometimes even in our sleeps, we are receiving transmission. There was a time when our teacher was offering a Dhamma talk, and in front of him, he saw a mother who is breastfeeding her newborn child, and she was covering herself, but Thai was aware that this child is receiving the nutriment from the mother. But Thai addressed the whole community. He said, in this moment, this child is not only receiving the transmission of nutriment from the mother, the child is also receiving Dhamma rain from Thai, who is teaching the way of understanding and love. And he's also receiving the collective energy of the hundreds of people that are present in this hall. And when I heard that, he activated my awareness that even though I'm not doing anything, there is a part of me that is entering into this baby, this child. And suddenly I realized myself sitting more upright. I was more mindful of my breath. I was more mindful of my presence. So the insight that we're always transmitting can be very supportive for us to engage more in our practice of awareness.
Beautiful, brother. I love the way you bring this into everyday life as well. And it brought up for me that when I first started working at The Guardian, there was no website. It was just the newspaper, and it moved quite slowly. And the way the editor-in-chief said, the way new journalists were trained was not to be told what to do, but just to sit with the experienced journalists and just spend weeks and months just understanding by watching and being present. And I remember that when the website came along and everything got very busy, I had a bit of a sort of epiphany about The Guardian, and I saw that there was I saw in my mind's eye a castle, and the castle was very busy. There was lots of stuff happening. And I went down into the basement and followed along a little path, a little corridor, to this small wooden doorway. And I walked in, and the room was empty apart from a stool. And on the stool was a cushion. On the cushion was a box. And when I opened the box, there was a pearl. And I recognized that that pearl was the embodiment of all that was beautiful and true in the Guardian's original intention of being born, what it was there for. But that in the busyness, people were losing that because they were forgetting, or they were just bringing their own personal views in rather than seeing that. So I then set up I set up a project which I ran for 10 years. Part of my job there was, and I set up a project called Living Our Values. And it was a way of helping everyone to not just recognize what the values were, but how they were embodying them in their work. So whether it was in the advertising department or the marketing department or the editorial department, to have that constant question, which was, are we living our values? Are we speaking to that? Are we holding true to that emanation? And another example that comes to mind, I used to know the chief executive of Unilever, which is one of the biggest consumer goods company in the world. And he said that when he joined the company, the first thing he did was go back to the roots and say, what was the root of this company? Why was it created? And it was created to make soap. In Manchester, and during the Industrial Revolution, there was so much dirt, and so Unilever created soap to help create health and help people to wash their hands. And on the basis of that, he turned the whole company back to sustainability and back to health to the extent he was able. And it speaks to me, both these examples speak to me of the importance of knowing the root of where something comes from and honoring that root and recognizing it has a life and energy that are beyond our understanding almost. So the Guardian, when I was there, was nearly 200 years old. And no one was alive who was there at the start. In fact, there'd been many generations, but there was something in the energy that I felt that was continuing and needed to be nurtured and protected. So given all that, I'm just wondering maybe for yourself, about how you see your place in that transmission, because the lineage goes back to the Buddha. So the original teaching is 2,000 years ago, so a bit longer than the Guardian. And yet you are representing those teachings today and being that conduit to people who come who want to understand the teaching. So how do you, given all that about beginner's mind, how do you represent that space? So how do you hold that space so that it is a clean teaching that comes from the Buddha through you and into the future?
I am still training in the art of deep listening. And I think a transmitter has to know how to listen in order for the offerings to be relevant and to be speaking to the need that is present. And when I think about the practice of mindfulness and the practice of Buddhism, a big part of it is about listening. Listening is the first doorway to communication. And I think a lot of us, we may think that communication is just about speaking or writing. But the foundation for speaking and for writing, it is listening. When the Buddhist talks about my practice that I offer to the world, it is the liberation. Liberation of what? It is suffering. And first of all, we have to learn to listen to our suffering. And being in the company of Thai, Thai means teacher in Vietnamese, and whenever I say Thai, that means my teacher, Zen Master Thich Nhat Hanh. Thai has always reminded us, when we are a teacher, we have to know how to listen to the present moment. That's the only way for our spiritual practice to be relevant, to be present moment based, and to be up to date. And as a student of Thai, one of his greatest offering in the spiritual world, and then to Buddhism as a pathway, is he was able to make Buddhism alive again through his way of teaching and through his way of understanding the Dharma. And there was one time I was able to watch him retranslate a sutra, because a lot of our sutra was handed down orally first and then written hundreds of years later. And so we know that there were misrepresentation of the teachings. And sometimes because of language and because of writings, the writings wasn't kept in a hard drive in a cloud like today. So there were marks in the Chinese letters that were missing, and it becomes another word. And Thai, who was fluent in writing and reading in Chinese, because in his generation, Vietnamese, we all had to know how to write and read in Chinese. Like my name, Phap Huu, it is Sino-Vietnamese, so it is Chinese Vietnamese. It is not everyday language. And you have to translate my name, and it means Bang Hu, it means a friend. but we don't use Huu as in friendship in daily conversation. So our teacher was not only was he a poet, but he did a lot of translation so that us everyday life people who don't know Chinese and don't know how to write and read in Sino-Vietnamese can understand the deepest writings and deepest gems of Buddhism, which were all recorded in Chinese in our Mahayana school of Buddhism. And there was a time Thai said, when Thai retranslate a lot of the sutras, Thai has to practice to check if these teachings are correct. And there was a time he said, Thai has fixed the sutra because it was translated wrong. And because Thai is a practitioner and Thai understood what the Buddha and the ancestors, the patriarchs were trying to transmit. And the later translation were done by scholars, but not by practitioners. And Thai said, when we are renewing Buddhism, renewing here is also sometimes in the light of teaching Buddhism. That is renewing Buddhism. We have to also, in Vietnamese, I say, "phải bắt trùng," it means pick the worms, meaning there are errors that were there. And we have to fix it. We have to realign it so that it is teaching the right Dharma. And for us, the right Dharma has to be in line with the Four Noble Truths, in line with the Eight Noble Path, the Three Doors of Liberation, the mindfulness trainings, mindfulness concentration insight, the 7 factors of awakening, and the list goes on and on and on and on. But at the core of it, it also have to help us be liberated from suffering. So it's very fascinating to understand and to get to witness a living transmitter, which was Thai, to see how he wasn't caught in how things were. It's very safe to lean back into, this is how it was. So let's just teach it exactly as it is. And when we get stuck there, then our teachings and our way of life won't be relevant. And there was a time in an interview, somebody asked Thai, do you see Buddhism as a religion? And Thai said, for some, to give it a frame that Buddhism is a religion is very helpful. Because as human beings, sometimes we need faith we need somewhere to give our faith to, our energy of devotion, trust. And religion has that umbrella, has that refuge where we can trust in ancient wisdom. But for Thai, he said, Thai sees that Buddhism is a way of life. When the Buddha embarked on a spiritual quest, he was looking for an understanding to suffering and a liberation from suffering. And therefore, the way of liberation from suffering is to be in suffering, to understand suffering, to embrace it, and not to run away from it, but to transform it. So therefore, Buddhism is a way of life. So mindfulness is a way of life. Transmission is a way of life. And there are formal practices that are helpful. There are ancient technologies, we would say. Like when we come together in a retreat and we listen to the bell and we all stop, that is a spiritual technology that we're applying to our modern ways. And it's very simple. When you hear the sound of the bell in the Plum Village tradition, you're invited to all take a pause, stop what you are doing. Even if you're listening to music, having a wonderful, insightful conversation, you are invited to pause, to stop. And that stopping is a transmission of knowing how to cultivate stillness in life in order to listen. Just like in music, for a note to be played, there has to be silence. For insight to emerge, there has to be emptiness. For the transmission of insight to be passed on to. And for our own insight to awaken, we have to listen to our thoughts. We have to listen to our feelings, our emotions. We have to listen to our daily life, our pains, our agony, even our happiness. Have we listened to our well-being in order to remain and cultivate that, to transmit that? So the insight of transmission, it starts with listening. And as you, Jo, you asked, I come back to it. It took me, we went into a very something quite deep. But I asked myself, like, what do I have to transmit? And sometimes I feel like I don't have much to transmit. I was speaking to a friend yesterday. We were catching up. He's been coming to Plum Village for a long time. And he also asked something very similar. And I said, I don't know. Sometimes I feel very powerless. And sometimes I feel, like I graduated. My highest education was grade 8, and I stopped education. I stopped the normal education. And the rest of my understanding of life was through my life as a monk, through the training, the ancient way of waking up, folding your blankets, making a cup of tea, tending to the gardens, tending to the human gardens, listening, a lot of listening. I've been an admirer of my teacher, and one of it that I wanted to offer my love to him was to be his attendant. And I wasn't being trained. I trained myself how to be a good attendant, and that was just by paying attention. And in the paying attention, it is listening with your eyes, seeing how my teacher operates in the day. When you listen and you observe, you can learn so much. Tai didn't tell me what he needed. And I think that's where we click. And that's where I became his long-time attendant, was because I was able to just observe. And I was receiving his transmission by not asking, but by observing. And in the transmission, you have to have the eagerness to learn. In the Dhamma, something that's very true is, if you don't want to learn, I can't transmit anything to you. Even if the wisdom is there, you won't receive it because you're not yet ready. You're not yet open. You haven't yet surrendered yourself. You haven't yet put down the fences of your pride to learn. And each and every one of us, we have our barriers of knowing, and we have our boundaries of knowledge, but our boundaries can continue to be expansive for us to see the richness of life. And so as a transmitter, I'm also always knowing that there's so much to learn. There's so much to be aware of. There's so much to listen to. So when I was able to acknowledge, there's not much that I can offer that maybe in my way of thinking that is sophisticated, but I've discovered something, and maybe all of us listeners of this podcast know that I think my language is very simple, and my offering is very simple. And I think that as long as I could be one of the monks or the spiritual friends that can offer teachings and offer my way of life in the most simplest way, I think there is those who want to hear the most simplest way. And I think that's going to be my contribution. And to know what is my transmission that I can offer that is true to myself. I've tried to be a little bit more sophisticated. I try to be more like as an intellect, writing on the board and so on. And I'm just like, this is not me. This is so not me. In this moment, it's just like, whatever arises, I would just offer. Or offer with the best capacity I can in this moment. And of course, there's many things I do really prepare for. But I think my deepest authenticity is now I come to a lot of spaces not knowing Jo. I really come to meetings, I come to even the podcast, even a Dharma talk in front of many, 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 many people. I can prepare like just a few notes. Okay, I gotta make sure I can offer something that people can reflect on themselves. How can I make my life more embodied with understanding and love? And how can I cultivate mindfulness in my life? How can I understand my actions more of its impact, right? Like these are some of the keynotes I always just bring to myself. But the rest, I want to listen to the community. And here is just by being in the energy of the community.
Beautiful, brother. It reminds me of when someone was asked, what is leadership? How can you be a good leader? And the response was, well, be truly yourself. Because you can't be a leader if you're not yourself, because then you're not in your center. So what I love about what you said is that actually by being yourself and being the most yourself you can be is the greatest way to teach, because then people trust. And I think there's so many people in the world who use fine words but don't live up to them. And so that's the basis of trust, that we can trust people. So, I see that very much in you, and that sense of, you talk about being simple, and simple isn't simplicity. Simple is the essence of the wisdom. And I think that's why people related to Thai so well, is because Thai use words, the most simple phrases and metaphors, like, if you plant enough flowers in your garden, look after them, you'll create a beautiful garden. Sounds, to some people, would be naive, but actually when you look deeply, the metaphors and language he used allowed us to touch into the depth of the wisdom. And that if he had come with a full-blown sort of teachings, then people would get lost. So I love that, what you said about the sutras were translated by scholars, but not necessarily practitioners. And Thai has also talked a lot about that, hasn't he? Is that actually people who study Buddhism doesn't equal, they're sometimes not good practitioners because they've allowed their intellectual understanding to take over. And so what you're talking about is your direct experience is more important. So I think something for you, Phap Huu, is that because you have not had the formal education, gone through university, filled your mind with a particular way of thinking, that's why you are able to transmit. Because actually your mind has not been cluttered by a sort of westernized view of life and a sort of scientific materialist view of life, that this equals that, a scientific way of seeing the world. But actually, from the age of 13, when you arrived here, you've been having a direct experience of life.
And one thing that I've learned in this tradition is also transmission. You don't have to be eager to transmit to feel whole. And I think this is something that is very difficult in our modern times. I didn't give my first public Dharma talk until 7 years after becoming a Dharma teacher. And that was being true to myself. And that means I have already been a monk for over 12 years. There was a moment in 2016, my elder brother, Brother Phap Huu, he's an elder brother, a dear friend, but at the same time, he was a mentor to me. And he was inviting me to give talks because I know he wanted to empower me and to step into my role of holding the lineage and transmitting it. And I tapped into my present moment, and I really felt this is not the moment for me to transmit, because I wasn't feeling whole and I was struggling during those years. And I was feeling like I was too fake if I was to be given a microphone. And I bowed to my brother with a lot of humility, and I said, I'm not ready. Maybe for some, that may have looked like a failure. I've been over 15 years as a monastic, still haven't given a Dharma talk. And I wasn't feeling empowered and ready to hold on to this lineage, to then be a transmitter of it. And at that present moment, I was just being true to my capacity. And I said, I'm not ready, San. When I'm ready, I will let the community know. But what he did activate in me was a seed, meaning that it's going to come time for you to step into that role. And just 1 year later, 2017, very organically, it manifested. A lot of my elders were away, and there wasn't enough fluent English speaker in Upper Hamlet, and there was a day of mindfulness. And it was so easy for me to raise my hand and say, I'll give the Dhamma talk on that Sunday. And I reflect on that, on that moment. I wasn't exactly like I have it. I wasn't liberated from my suffering just 1 year later, I was still going through my ups and downs. I was still trying to figure out, what does it mean now to be a monk without my teacher teaching and living? Because I was, it was a privilege and also a curse by being so close to Thai. The privilege was not having to worry about the Dharma because you have one of the greatest stars. And the curse is now you feel very empty, and you're never going to feel good enough because you witness his talent and his skillfulness. And the curse was I would never be able to do that. And that was my own view that I created for the Dharma podium. And the miracle of that moment, of the present moment, was no one is here that can give a fluent English speaking Dharma talk. And in that moment, I'm the only one. And it's almost like the ancestors. It's like, Phap Huu, it's time. Just raise your hand. And when I raised my hand of the need to serve. It wasn't for pride. It wasn't because it's my time to shine. Anything like after I raised my hand, like I had like 1 month to prepare, and every day was like goosebumps. I was like, what have I done? Like, I'm gonna make a fool out of myself, and so on. And then the beauty of then activating that was surrendering to that. So now it's almost like when you're a parent, you have to surrender to knowing that you're a father now. Every action you do will have a transmission to your children. So as a Dharma teacher, when we are in that position, every action that we take and we make is a transmission to our own living community. And I touched something very deeply. When I was a young attendant with Thai, we've had, some very tender moment together and some very human moments. Thai, maybe you all know him as a Zen master, but he sometimes would ask me coming back to the hut, and he was like, Phap Huu, do you think my teaching was okay? Do you think people understood what I said? Do you think people were able to receive the Dharma that I transmitted? So even Tai needed validation. And whether he needed it or not, it doesn't matter. What I felt was his human side, you know? And I'm always like, Tai, dude, that was amazing. It's gonna take me a lifetime to practice this, but I got it. And I said, Tai, I think if only a few of us got it, it's always worth it, right? And there was one time, there was a Dhamma talk he gave, and I really praised him, and I really said, Tai, that was what the community really needed. And he always tells me this. He always says, it's not Tai, it's the ancestors. And whenever he said that, when I was a young monk, I always engage in that quote as, Tai, you're so humble. Or Tai, you're such a poet. Of course it's not you, it's the ancestors, it's the universe, it's the trees that are speaking. But that day, when I stepped into the Dhamma hall to give my first Dhamma talk, and you can find it on YouTube, it's in 2017. I don't remember the title of it.
We'll put it in the show notes. Just
you can see, how young I was, and maybe how naive I was, even maybe in the way I presented the Dhamma. But I remember routines, and Tai had a routine to prepare to transmit something. You got to prepare yourself when you're going to be a transmitter. And his routine was, whenever we came into this hall, into this hut here that we're sitting, it would always be in silence. I'll make tea, and he creates this aura around him, this force field. Is like, don't talk to me. But it's not scary. It's almost like I'm entering into a space of non-self. So don't bring yourself to it. Join me in this energy. And I would invite Tai a cup of tea, and we would sit in silence to have the cup of tea. And then he would look at me and say, it's time. And I said, it's time. And we would walk in silence from here to the meditation hall. It's not that far. But that walk is a walk I always felt of just deep present moment. And it's like a field of preparing oneself. And I've always felt, as his attendant, one of my role is to intercept anybody who is going to intercept Tai. But because of the force field that he has created, you can't intercept him even. It's like you don't dare to touch that space. And then he comes into the hall, and in our tradition, when a teacher comes in, we all show respect, and we all stand up. And we stand up. It's not about hierarchy here. It's about somebody is gonna come and offer their whole self, the knowledge that they have gained, and they're just gonna offer it to us generously. And the least we can do is to show our presence. And in our tradition, that's an action of all of us standing up as one body to receive from one person that represents a whole lineage. And I remember when the community stood up, I had goosebumps. It's the first time everybody in this hall, many of them are my senior, all stood up. And I felt I wasn't walking in the shadow of Tai's footstep, but I felt like I was walking in the footsteps that Tai has transmitted to me, which is a footstep of presence, non-fear, and of ancestors. And I felt in that moment, Jo, this is not even about me. So what I'm going to give is just to everyone that is present. And what I'm going to give is just the Dhamma. It's not about me. It's not if you like me or not. It's about a transmission of love and understanding. And when I entered into the podium and I sat down, and I finally understood Tai's quote, it's not me. And for me, it's not you. It's the ancestors now. And that was a moment when I received a very strong transmission myself.
Wow, beautiful, brother. I may go back and look at that myself, that 2017. And brother also speaks about the accumulation of wisdom, and that transmission is not it doesn't stay put in one place. So for most people who have listened to Thai's Dharma talks, Thai would probably be over 60 years old at that point, or maybe 70 or 80. And had been practicing since he was a teenager. So I'm sure if we'd seen Thai talk sort of when he was sort of 25, 30, 35, it would have been a very different Thai. So I think there's something around also being in the present moment with the teacher and not saying, so often people say, oh, well, 10 years ago you said, and I hold you to that. We see that in politics, all places. You said this 20 years ago, but actually our understanding deepens, our wisdom deepens, and our ability to share deepens. So, brother, as you're talking, I can't help it, because I am a self, relating that in a sense to my practice, because I coach people, and when I look out at the websites of other people who coach, so many of them promise so many things. You know, I'm going to heal you of this. I'm going to, within 30 days, you will be changed by this. And there's a part of me that feels there's such a hook in that because for me, a transmission doesn't have, I am transmitting this and you will therefore become this, or you will therefore learn that, and you will transform into that. Whereas for me, when people sort of ask me, you know, how do you work? I say, well, I don't have any theory of change. I don't have any methodology. I'm just going to love you. I'm just going to be your friend. There's no hierarchy. I'm going to walk alongside you. And also what has developed more recently is I'm not going to try and save you. Because I realized I was very caught up in the past by the success of the coaching was based in, did that person change? Did they solve that problem? And I've increasingly understood that through a few teachings of Plum Village. Firstly, the teaching of ripening, that it takes time. And that it may be that in the time I spend with this person that, as you talked about, I will plant the seeds of change, but it may not ripen in that time. Also, that person may not be ready. Part of them may be wanting to change, but another part of them may be holding back. But also about the interbeing, which you talked about earlier, is ultimately I'm coaching someone or I'm with a group, but actually it's one person present. And that person's suffering is my suffering, and my suffering is their suffering, and that I'm not here to tell them what to do. I might share my experience, but actually also it's about just deep listening, as you talked about. I'm going to really listen 100%. And in the listening, I will pick up signs, because if I'm talking a lot, then I won't be able to hear. So all that to say, brother, that there's something very tender about transmission.
I think what's tender is our willingness to grow. And that means like shedding our skins to have fresh skin, like a snake, right? Like a lizard, a snake. I'm not sure about lizard, but I know snakes, they know when it's time to let go of that shield, so that the new shield, the new skin can manifest. And that's very hard to do, especially with knowledge. As human beings, we've been taught to have knowledge is one of the greatest power. is one of the greatest essence of superiority. And so if I have knowledge, that means I'm better than you. School, it's a whole system of competition. It's a whole system of who's better than who, right? Report cards and A plus, B minus, C, and
With me, brother, it was D and E.
oh my gosh, like like if I have a C, I'm happy, But it creates this stereotype how we look at each other in the world. And we bring it to spirituality. I've seen it. I've seen it in the monastics. I've seen it in the friends that come through the practice. It's like, I want to go deeper, brother. How do I go deeper? I'm like, what does deep mean to you? Like, are you... It's a real question. And our thirst is also a hook, just like you said. It's good to have aspiration. It's good to have intention to learn. It's good to have the openness to learn. But when you only want to learn and you're not practicing, though, that becomes dangerous. That becomes a kind of hungry ghost energy that we speak about in our tradition. And a hungry ghost in Buddhism, it represents those who are always hungry. And artist draws an image is somebody who has a very skinny neck, but their body's very big because they're very hungry. But they cannot swallow because their throat is so small. And sometimes we have this hungry ghost energy in us. We want more. I want more. I have this energy in me. We also speak of it as the wanderer, where it's not happy in the present moment, who thinks about the grass that is greener on the other side. And even with all the knowledge we have, we're not practicing. We're not applying anything. We have insight. A lot of us, we have insight. But we can't stop going in circle. So as a transmitter, what is very important, and I apply this to myself, is number one, am I practicing? Am I practicing the Dharma that I am transmitting? Am I giving space and time to also see if my teachings can translate into people's lives? Am I asking questions with my peers, with my friends, with my spiritual friends? Like what I offer, like, did it make sense? Was it too woo-woo? Was it too hopeful? Was it too raw? And that's really important to get feedback, especially as those of us in the spiritual space. We sometimes, our own arrogance and our own pride becomes the obstacle to hear and to listen to what wasn't helpful. I've heard feedback where I got angry because all I wanted to do was to help someone, but I listened and I said, I was so unskillful. And maybe it's the energy I brought, maybe it's the way I was speaking it. Maybe it's my body positioning, It's so much nuances to the art of supporting someone. And as a transmitter, we can only become a better transmitter when we see ourselves changing in the way we offer. And I see it, I see I slow down a lot in my speaking. I articulate much better now. And this is because of listening. And this is because I learn. When I listen to others teach, I am in awe of how they represent. But I've learned to not fall into the traps like I want to be like that. It's not being like that. It's about, there's a skill there, that there's a way there that I would like to cultivate in myself. And language is really important. Like, you know how the Buddha says that the mind creates the world. And for me, to take that one more step, the mind is already action. And we know the second course of action that the Buddha speaks about in karma is our words. What we say, how we say it, the tone of saying it, that creates a reality, that creates a transmission of knowledge, a transmission of feelings, a transmission of energy. And so when I listen to a teaching, I listen also to that person's body, what is coming up for them. I've listened to teachers who can cry in the present moment. And in that moment, I feel very humble to be allowed into that space of vulnerability. And I ask myself, are there sides of me that I'm still hiding from myself? So like in the emptiness of communication, when we're listening to a Dharma talk, to a podcast, the deepest way of listening, our teacher would always encourage us, don't bring your notebooks, don't bring a pen. Because when you're writing things down, you're missing the rest that is being offered. Because you're caught in the words or the phrase that you feel, that is so great. Let me take that. Let me steal that. And I've heard this. And I wanna offer a language to all of us. In the Dharma, everything is to receive. Instead of let me steal this, I heard this in the science retreat. And it was in a panel. It was a beautiful panel between young scientists and the whole community. And a lot of these young scientists are all long-term practitioners. And this one young scientist professor was offering something. And somebody watered the flower of the friend and said, what you said there was so beautiful. I'm gonna steal that. And my whole body reacted. I'm like, this is colonialism 101. And the transmitter was like, it's all yours, take it. I wish I wanted to speak up. I wanted to say, wait, can I just correct the language right now? Because in Buddhism, it's a very generous tradition. The Buddha offers, the teachers offer, you're the receiver. You can receive. When you use the language of I am receiving, it's very different than I am taking. Or even worse, I am stealing. Because when we steal, that indicates that's yours now. It belongs to you. But when you receive, you have now a responsibility to transmit. So in the other light of transmission in our tradition, whatever you are receiving is not yours. Now you have a role because you're holding on this flame of light. You have a responsibility to transmit this warmth, this light, this compassion, this wisdom to others now. So the tradition should be a tradition of generosity. So please, all of us, let us be mindful of language we use. I've been on a very deep journey of decolonizing my own mind. So language is very important. The words we use, can I steal that? Can I take that? Can I receive that? Can I receive your offering, dear teachers, dear siblings? And I will, when the time is right, I will transmit this. And that is the spirit of inclusiveness. And that also highlights the you in it. There is a you in the receiving, but that you is empty because that you knows that you're going to transmit this now. And there is so much power when we enter into that space. You become so generous. You become so compassionate. And your heart is not little anymore. But when we use languages, it's like, let me take that. Can I take that from you, Jo? And can I brand that? Can that be Phap Huu now? That's so dangerous, right? There are things that we have to honor. It's like, what I offer to you it's of this tradition. But this tradition is made of non-traditional elements. Buddhism is made of non-Buddhist element. And it's also so important to bring our gratitude to its roots also. So in our practice now, in my own practice as a transmitter, I do it sometimes signlessly, like I don't do it for people to see. It's my own self. I would touch the earth after giving a talk, after offering a retreat, because I do feel a lot of joy, and in that joy there's a pride, right? It's good to feel that we're able to help people. We're able to embrace a retreat of 200 people and to see 200 people leave with a lighter heart. Like I want to feel good about that because that gives me meaning to my life. But there's another practice I have to do, is to share that merit. Is then to transmit this feeling of worth, this feeling of success to now the whole cosmos, to the past, the present, and the future.
Brother, thank you so much for that. It feels like, and this is the way I sort of feel it, it's like we're a channel. And it doesn't start with us and it doesn't end with us, but we are like the custodians in order to pass it on. And I love your sense of, generosity, because actually what it does is it takes away the need for success or failure. Because if it's not ours, then there's no success or failure. And if it's not ours, whether someone else receives the transmission or doesn't is not our responsibility. And because it doesn't affect us whether they get it or not. All we can do is hold ourselves to the best of our ability. And then that is the offer. Whereas so much of the time, if we think it's ours or we try to steal it, we have such an attachment to other people believing us or agreeing with us or following us or whatever. So there's such... For me, there's great freedom in that. Brother, just to go beyond the human for a moment, as a last part of this. So when we were walking, I'm with Paz is sitting here, my wife Paz is sitting here with us, and we were walking up through the forest. We were just chatting about sort of transmission and talk about nature as a great transmitter, because there's no language. And Paz was saying that... So she spends quite a lot of time sort of with trees, sitting with trees, walking under trees. And that sometimes she asks herself, am I as rooted as this tree? Am I able to reach up into the sky and be as open as this tree? Am I able to see impermanence like this tree? And there's a lot of understanding within the Plum Village tradition of the importance of nature. Plum Village is not in a city, it's out in the middle of the French countryside, about the importance of nature as a transmission. Because we all know that one of the best things to do when we're feeling lost or upset or in pain is to go for a walk and to remember that life is beyond our pain, our suffering, that in some ways it's very impersonal. There's no tree looking at another tree and saying, I wish I was tall as you, or why aren't my leaves as fresh, or why aren't my plums as big as juice as the plums of the tree along the road. And for me, we've spent 5 years actually as of last week in Plum Village. Before that, we were always in cities in the centre of New York for 5 years. And just the transmission of nature is so powerful. It allows me to calm myself. I feel much more calm. I feel much more at ease. I'm able to be present to life, to be present to a flower growing rather than rush past it. And now when I go to a city like London or New York, it's like really overwhelming because there's so much going on and so many people trying to actually grab our attention and grab our money and grab and nature is so beautiful because it doesn't try to grab anything from us. But it'd be lovely for you to talk a bit about, from your perspective, of the nature as almost a perfect transmitter.
I think Mother Earth is our greatest teaching. She holds all the wisdom that all saints and Buddhas and prophets and scientists and musicians, we continue to be inspired by the cosmos, by nature. When you were speaking, and I did grow up in the suburbs, and I remember my relationship to nature was so limited, was the grass. I had to cut grass. Mom and dad would say, go do your chores, and cut grass. And I had to learn to reconnect to the meaning of nature. And that was a whole education. And it wasn't by the Discovery Channel, which was very helpful, by the way, but it was by being informed and engaged with nature. Because still, like watching the Discovery Channel or National Geographic is like, that's still intellectual knowledge. But only when you have like suffered and you don't want to be with humans anymore, because humans is the cause of a lot of our own suffering as humanity. And you just realize you find yourself in nature and you feel so embraced by nature and so humbled by how small we are. And the ocean is the same. I've had the incredible opportunity to just sit on a longboard in the deep ocean, and it was the scariest thing ever. I paddled so far that it was very meditative, but then I looked down and it was just deep, dark ocean. And fear was there, but there was something that also arose in that moment. It's like, we're just a speck of a being in this whole cosmos. And there's so much more that is beyond us. And one of the beauty that I've learned in Buddhism, in ceremonies, I grew up not superstitious, and I was very proud of that. But then I saw that I was ignorant also to some of my own arrogance of not believing and not seeing the beauty and understanding of rituals. Because we think, and I grew up in Toronto learning to be the best, and everything is scientific materials, and the more we have, the better we are, right? And that is such a wrong view. And then coming to the monastery, I remember being part of a ceremony where the monks were developing a new building. And the community came together, lit an incense, chanted, and offered its gratitude to the land and asked permission from the land that we would like to build a dining hall here so it can be a space for all of us to take refuge in. And that means we're going to dig, we're going to uproot, we are going to cut trees, branches, so on, bushes. And that means we are also removing life. And I remember just listening to the prayer, asking permission. It was maybe a moment of a little awakening of wow, we have to be so humble to the spaces that we are in. And this has deepened my relationship more to human beings. Because if I know how to respect a tree, which is sometimes I feel is easier because a tree doesn't talk back. A tree doesn't hit back. I've learned to love a tree, and I've learned to see, our teacher has this phrase, is that humanity as flowers in the garden of humanity, and we're all very different. So it can translate our deeper relationship to nature, can remind us of us as human being part of the ecosystem of our society, of our community, of our little families, of our little pods that we may be in, and to have respect for one another too. And sometimes we need rituals, you know, whether it is, whether we see ourselves spiritual or not, you know. I remember when we were creating the album, A Cloud Never Dies, and we had a lot of talented songwriters, musicians, rappers, and so on. And there was a moment when we felt, even in the monastic, our pride was, we were on a high, like from all of these jamming sessions, and you can feel the level of like, this is my part now, this is your part now, and we're all like dividing, and we were breaking free, we were breaking away from the collectiveness, and we held a ceremony. It was very simple. We sat together, we lit sage, and we first invited all of us to sit and breathe as one body. And then I was asked to speak about intentionality, like, why are we creating music? And when I spoke these words, and then I asked everybody to give a few words of what it means for us to offer ourselves to this project. And we all tapped into, again, the interbeing. And we just, after that, we ended with 3 sounds of the bell. We're like, okay, let's make music. And it shifted the energy right away. So like coming back to, as humans, to relate to nature, our ancestors have created rituals to feel aligned with the earth. And I'm very proud that in our tradition that we can do this. And I'm very proud that we are doing this and we're continuing this. I'm proud of myself in being open and learning to see the beauty of the unknown. And before the summer retreat, which is like the most busiest retreat, we call it the mothership of all retreats. And we're all activated. We're hosting maybe 3,000 in just 3 weeks of people. So we do a hungry ghost ceremony, and we did it before this retreat. And as the abbot and our elder brother, Brother Phap Huu, Brother Turtle, as some of you may know, he is somebody who's very virtuous, and we were asked to hold the incense and to make a prayer in our minds, the intention of what the community is about to step into. And just a few days ago, so this was probably like 5 days ago, we have been grieving in the community. There's been somebody in our Sangha who passed away due to an accident. And I asked the land, I asked all the beings, I asked all of the beings that we cannot see also to support us in our deepest aspiration, and that is to hold a 3-week retreat for thousands of people to come and take refuge, and to support us in the guiding, in the holding space, in the safety of everyone, in the intention of everyone, in the offering that we're gonna give so that it is aligned to the true Dharma. And in that speaking, I'm making a vow myself, right? And there is an outer and inner in play in that moment. And then we touch the earth deeply, and it's an act of humility. It's an act of requesting. Just like when we said at the beginning, to receive, we have to ask. So we are the transmitter, but we are also the receiver. So we're receiving from this land. We're receiving from this stream of ancestors of this tradition. We're asking for all of the ancestors that were here before us, the ones we don't know, that may have died on this land, to support us in this offering. So to say, as a monk and in this tradition, I have only learned to to love deeper to the non-human elements, and to see the magic of it. I was very happy that about a month ago, I was able to grieve a tree that fell. We had a storm one night, and we all came out of meditation, and we were going to our dining hall for breakfast. And one of our big walnut tree has fell down. And it's the first time I think I felt like such pain for a tree. And I never felt like that for trees and for plants. And I'm 24 years in. It's taken a long time to unlearn so many things that we have been brought up in. To then touch that, wow, this tree is not here with us anymore. We're going to have to cut it now. The root is totally uprooted. There is no way of saving it. And while the brothers were sawing it, we're cutting it with the machines that we have made. Isn't it so contradicting? Using the machines that we have made to then free it from the pain that it is in. And while the brothers were sawing it, I was so attracted to the tree that I just put my hand on one of its big branch. And I was just thanking it for its years of refuge. So many people have sat under this walnut tree for Dharma sharing. And as you know, in Dharma sharing, some of the greatest insight blossom and some of the greatest understanding of ourself was revealed to ourselves. So like this tree was a Buddha to many of us. And I was so happy to be able to offer my gratitude to it. It's easy, maybe it's not easy, but it's more simpler to feel that to human beings. But in that moment when that tree fell and the chainsaws were cutting through the trees, I also felt a part of my limbs were being cut, and then in the interbeing of it, knowing that that tree is a part of me now. And how will I plant new trees? Not just physical trees, but new trees of insights, of love and understanding. So the transmission, it can also be seen as in the birth and death. It's always happening. No birth, no death. And when we touch transmission, we touch the insight of also no birth, no death. Those who have died, those who are dying, and those who are alive, we're all interrelated. And so our life is a transmission of those who have passed.
Thank you so much. And just to reiterate one thing you said, which I really loved, is that if we truly receive the Dharma, if we are open to receiving it, it's not personal. It is, if we receive it honestly and openly, by its nature, we want to share it. That it's not, doesn't start with us, doesn't end with us. We are part of this extraordinary flow of life. So thank you, brother. Dear listeners, if you enjoyed this episode, which we hope you did, there are many more. And you can find them all on Apple Podcasts, on Spotify, other platforms that carry podcasts, and also on our very own Plum Village app.
And dear friends, we are in the summer retreat, and I have other activities to attend to, so we don't have time for a guided meditation in today's recording. But you can find previous guided meditation in the on-the-go section of the Plum Village app. And this podcast is co-produced with Global Optimism and the Plum Village app, with the support from all of our generous friends of the Thich Nhat Hanh Foundation and those who support the Thich Nhat Hanh Foundation. If you feel inspired to support the podcast and the monastery moving forward and the work that us monks and nuns we are committed to offering, please support us and go to tnhf.org/donate. And we would like to offer our gratitude to our friends and collaborators, Clay, aka the Podfather, our co-producer, Kata, our co-producer, our other friend Jo, our audio and editing, today Georgine, our sound engineer, Anka, our show notes and publishing, and Jasmine and Cindy, our social media guardian angel, as well as all of you who continue to listen and support the podcast. Thank you for being there.
The way out is in.